Hello, everyone. Stop what you are doing right now and listen, because the geopolitical landscape of the world just shifted in a way that most experts thought was impossible only 48 hours ago. From the volatile, oil-slicked waters of the Strait of Hormuz to the gilded, echoing corridors of power in the Kremlin, and from the sun-drenched but desperate shores of Cuba to the high-pressure jet fuel depots of Europe. A series of explosive developments is redrawing the map of global power before our very eyes. We are witnessing a moment of unprecedented global tension, where military threats, scorched earth, economic warfare, and secret diplomatic maneuvers are converging into a single, massive global storm that threatens to upend the lives of every person on this planet. The old world order is not just cracking. It is being systematically dismantled by actors who no longer care about the rules of the 20th century. The waters of the Middle East are boiling today as the Iranian regime has issued a direct, high-stakes ultimatum to the United States Navy that has sent shockwaves through the Pentagon. Senior military advisors to the supreme leader in Tehran have openly declared, in no uncertain terms, that they are prepared to sink American warships if Washington attempts to exert even a shred of control over the Strait of Hormuz. This is not just empty rhetoric or the usual saber-rattling we have seen for decades. It is a calculated, cold-blooded provocation that has put the entire global energy market on a razor-sharp deadline. When the world's most vital energy artery is threatened with total closure, every economy from Beijing to Berlin feels the heat. Mohsen Rezai, a powerful and influential military advisor to Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, appeared on Iranian state television on the 15th of the month to deliver a chilling warning that was clearly intended for a global audience. He claimed that the presence of modern American vessels in the region poses a massive existential risk to the United States military itself. According to Rezai, these ships, the crown jewels of American naval power, would be sunk by the very first volley of Iranian missiles. He claimed with absolute confidence that everything within the region, every carrier, every destroyer, and every support ship is within their strike range and can be destroyed at any moment of Tehran's choosing. Let that sink in for a moment. A senior official of a major regional power is publicly and gleefully fantasizing about the destruction of the world's most advanced naval fleet. Rezai is not some fringe figure. He commanded the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps from 1981 to 1997, during some of Iran's most formative and violent years. He represents the most hardline, uncompromising faction of the Iranian establishment, the men who believe that a direct confrontation with the great Satan is not only inevitable, but desirable. He even went as far as to describe a potential American ground invasion as a wonderful opportunity, suggesting with a straight face that Tehran would capture thousands of American hostages and demand a ransom of $1 billion for each and every person. This is the language of a hostage taker, not a statesman, and it reveals the true nature of the regime Washington is currently facing. However, the reality on the water paints a very different, much more complex picture than the one presented by the fever dreams of Iranian propaganda. While Tehran boasts of its anti-ship ballistic missiles and its swarm of suicide drones, the United States Navy is not sitting idly by. American carrier strike groups are currently operating their most advanced Aegis air defense systems in the Gulf of Oman, the vast, deep gateway that leads to the open ocean. By staying outside the narrow, cramped, and easily targeted confines of the Strait of Hormuz, the U.S. Navy maintains a strategic advantage that makes Iranian targeting nearly impossible in real time. The Pentagon knows that the strait is a death trap, and they have no intention of sailing into a bottleneck. This suggests that the claims made by Rezai and his colleagues are more about domestic posturing and projecting strength to a restless Iranian population than about actual military viability in a high-intensity conflict. While the threats of kinetic war grow louder and more theatrical, the United States is already winning a silent, devastating and far more effective battle in the realm of economic warfare. The Department of the Treasury has just launched what senior officials are calling a campaign of economic fury, specifically targeting the shadowy oil elite that sustains the Tehran regime's grip on power. On Wednesday, the 15th, Washington announced a massive, sweeping wave of sanctions against more than 20 individuals, front companies, and aging vessels that form the backbone of a sophisticated multi-billion-dollar oil smuggling network. This is about cutting off the oxygen to the regime's heart. At the center of this massive investigation is Mohammad Javad Zamhani, the son of the late Ali Samkhani. For those who don't follow Middle Eastern power dynamics closely, Ali Samkhani was a former high-ranking security official and a key architect of Iran's nuclear and regional security policies for decades. He was the man who knew where all the bodies were buried and where all the money was hidden. Ali Samkhani was reportedly eliminated in a highly coordinated surgical strike between the United States and Israel on the 28th of the previous month. Now, in a move that shows Washington's commitment to total victory, the United States is systematically dismantling the multi-billion-dollar business empire his family built on the backs of the struggling Iranian people. Treasury Secretary Scott Bent has been crystal clear about the objective of these measures, leaving no room for misinterpretation. He stated that the administration will use every tool at its disposal, including the dreaded secondary sanctions, to crush the financial networks that support state-sponsored terrorism and the illicit oil trade. This is a clear, unambiguous signal to every financial institution, every shipping company, and every insurance broker on the planet. If you do business with Tehran's elite, if you help them move a single barrel of oil, you will be permanently cut off from the global financial system. There is no middle ground. In this fight, you are either with the international community or you are an economic pariah. The Zamhani network is a masterclass in international deception, utilizing a complex overlapping web of administrative, consulting, and shipping companies scattered across the United Arab Emirates, India, the Netherlands, and the Marshall Islands. These entities maintain a sophisticated, polished public image to create a veneer of legitimacy while secretly moving millions of barrels of Iranian and Russian oil across the globe using a ghost fleet of tankers with falsified transponders by adding 17 entities and 9 specific vessels to the special designated nationals list. The United States has effectively paralyzed a vital artery of the Iranian economy. This is a surgical strike on the regime's wallet, and the pain is going to be felt immediately in the halls of power in Tehran. But the pressure does not stop at the Iranian border. This is a global dragnet. The Treasury Department also targeted networks involved in massive money laundering operations for Hezbollah in Lebanon. This includes targeted sanctions against individuals like Izzat Naimeh, Baratan Mossari, a shadowy figure who is accused of facilitating the exchange of Iranian oil for Venezuelan gold. This triangular trade between Tehran, Caracas, and Beirut represents a desperate, last-ditch attempt by these sanctioned regimes to survive by bypassing the dollar-based economy. However, as these new sanctions prove, the walls are rapidly closing in, and the world is becoming a very small place for those who try to hide from the reach of the U.S. Treasury. As Iran faces this twin pincer movement of internal unrest and external economic pressure, its primary ally in the north is facing a catastrophic crisis of its own. Vladimir Putin, the man who has projected an image of absolute, unflappable economic stability for over 2 decades, is reportedly losing his composure behind the closed, heavy doors of the Kremlin. For the second time in a single month, Putin has demanded that his government and the central bank explain in excruciating detail why the Russian economy is performing significantly worse than even their own most pessimistic and guarded forecasts. The mask of the fortress economy is finally beginning to slip. The data coming out of Russia, despite the Kremlin's best efforts to massage the numbers, is nothing short of catastrophic for a nation currently engaged in a high-intensity war of attrition. According to the Ministry of Economic Development, the Russian gross domestic product dropped by 1.8% in the first 2 months of this year compared to the same period last year. The Russian Academy of Sciences, usually a bastion of state-aligned optimism, now estimates a 1.5% year-on-year decline for this quarter. This directly contradicts the central bank's earlier, more hopeful projections of a 1.6% growth rate. We are talking about a massive multi-billion-dollar swing in the wrong direction. Putin is reportedly refusing to accept the official excuses being fed to him by his ministers. Excuses such as the fact that January had 2 fewer working days than the previous year. He knows that the problem is systemic. He has lamented that industrial production and the construction sector, which are the fundamental systemic pillars of any modern economy, are suffering massive structural losses. Rostat, the state statistics agency, reports that construction activity plummeted by 16% in January and 14% in February. This is not the sign of a robust, resilient wartime economy. It is the sign of a nation that is being hollowed out from within, as every available ruble is diverted to the front lines in Ukraine. The business climate in Russia has effectively hit a dead end. The Business Climate Index, a crucial metric calculated by the central bank to gauge the health of the private sector, hovered around a stagnant 0.2 in January before dropping into terrifying negative territory at minus 0.1 in February. Let that sink in. When a nation's business index falls below 0, it signifies a transition from stagnation to active, accelerating contraction. Revenue across almost all civilian sectors is falling. and the situation is deteriorating with each passing month as the astronomical cost of the war in Ukraine continues to skyrocket beyond anyone's imagination. The most alarming figure for the Kremlin, the one that likely keeps Putin awake at night, is the total collapse of oil and gas revenues, which fell by a staggering 45% in the first quarter. Compared to last year, this is the lifeblood of the Russian state, and it is being drained away by Western price caps and a shrinking pool of willing buyers, despite the government's desperate, frantic attempts to raise funds. Through increased value-added taxes and excise duties on the backs of its citizens, non-oil revenue only grew by a measly 7%. Meanwhile, government spending, driven by the insatiable hunger of the war machine, surged by 17%. This has resulted in a staggering budget deficit of 4.58 trillion rubles for the quarter, a figure that has already exceeded the planned deficit for the entire year in just 3 months. International observers, including the World Bank and the IMF, have noted that the temporary artificial spike in oil prices caused by the tensions in Iran is not nearly enough to reverse Russia's long-term downward debt trend. Even pro-Kremlin research institutes have been forced to admit that economic growth will likely be capped at a pathetic 0.5% this year, which is essentially statistical noise. The high interest rates maintained by the central bank to combat runaway inflation are suffocating private investment, which fell by 2.3% last year and is expected to continue its free fall. Russia is becoming a command economy, where the only thing being produced is death and destruction. The true tragedy of the Russian economy is that its only remaining growth is concentrated in the military-industrial complex. While factories are churning out tanks, shells, and missiles at record rates, they are draining the lifeblood, the talent, and the resources from the civilian economy. Production of basic consumer goods is stagnant or declining, leading to a situation where the state is essentially consuming itself to stay on the battlefield. As one senior researcher from Harvard University noted, even if the war ended tomorrow, it would not restore the broken trust of the business community or bring back the millions of young, educated workers who have fled the country to avoid being sent to the meat grinder. Russia is mortgaging its entire future for a war it cannot afford to win. While the world's attention is understandably focused on the Middle East and Eastern Europe, a new and potentially more explosive front may be opening much closer to home for the United States. There are mounting, unmistakable signs that the Pentagon is quietly but rapidly accelerating plans for a significant military operation in Cuba. On Wednesday, senior defense officials stated that they are prepared for multiple scenarios and are ready to execute the orders of the president at a moment's notice. The rhetoric coming out of Washington suggests that the island nation, just 90 miles from Florida, is once again in the crosshairs of Americans' strategic interests in a way we haven't seen since the Cold War. A recent scathing State Department report submitted to Congress has added high-octane fuel to the fire, accusing the Cuban government of being directly complicit in Russia's war against Ukraine. The report claims that thousands of Cuban citizens have emerged as one of the largest and most active foreign fighter groups supporting Russian military operations in the Donbass. While some analysts argue these men were tricked into military contracts by the promise of Russian citizenship and high wages, the political impact in Washington has been nothing short of explosive. Senators like Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, both deeply connected to the Cuban-American community, are calling for a fundamental, permanent change in the relationship with Havana. They see this as a betrayal that cannot be ignored. Donald Trump has been uncharacteristically blunt and aggressive about his intentions for the island if he returns to power. He recently stated in a private gathering that he expects to have the honor of taking over Cuba in some form, adding with his signature bravado that whether he liberates it or occupies it, he believes he can do whatever he wants with it because of the threat it poses. During a recent appearance at the White House, he even suggested that the United States might pay a visit to Cuba after dealing with the ongoing conflict with Iran. This kind of language has sent shockwaves through the Caribbean and has left diplomats in the region scrambling to understand if this is campaign rhetoric or a genuine policy shift toward regime change. In Havana, the government of Miguel Diaz-Canel is clearly preparing for the worst-case scenario. The Cuban president has declared a state of high alert, stating that his country will fight to the death to defend its sovereignty and that dying for the fatherland is to live. The tension reached a violent breaking point following a secret American Special Operations raid in Venezuela that captured former President Nicolás Maduro. During that high-stakes raid, 32 elite Cuban soldiers who were providing personal protection for Maduro were killed in the crossfire. This event has served as a grim, bloody preview of what a direct confrontation between American special forces and Cuban regulars might look like on the island itself. Military experts believe that a United States campaign in Cuba, should it come to that, would result in an overwhelming and rapid military victory. The island's military equipment is largely Soviet-era junk, and there are serious, nagging questions about the loyalty of the officer corps to a regime that has presided over decades of crushing economics, hardship, and systemic failure. However, the real daunting challenge would be what comes after the initial invasion. Establishing a new government, a functioning economy, and a rule of law in a post-communist society that has known only one-party rule for 60 years would be a political and social task far more difficult than the military conquest itself. Washington would be responsible for 11 million people overnight. Amidst all this talk of war and invasion, there is a small, flickering glimmer of hope for a ceasefire in another blood-soaked corner of the Middle East. The Security Cabinet of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met late Wednesday in a high-tension session to discuss a potential temporary truce in Lebanon. Pressure from the Biden administration has reached a fever pitch, with senior Israeli political sources suggesting that a total ceasefire may be unavoidable within the next few days due to international pressure and the fatigue of the reserve forces. Washington is pushing hard for a one-week pause in hostilities to facilitate broader negotiations and to prevent a full-scale regional conflagration. The goal of this proposed ceasefire is twofold and highly ambitious: to stop the immediate fighting between Israel and Hezbollah and to create a diplomatic opening with Iran to end the broader regional war. While the United States officially denies that it is pressuring its closest ally, the reality on the diplomatic front suggests a very different story of intense, behind-the-scenes arm twisting. Hezbollah officials, likely feeling the heat from the Israeli onslaught, have also indicated that there is significant momentum toward a deal, with discussions evolving by the hour in Beirut and Paris. This could be the first real step in de-escalating a conflict that has threatened to engulf the entire region in flames. However, the Israeli military is not letting up for a single second until a deal is signed and verified. The 603rd Combat Engineering Battalion has been systematically and ruthlessly destroying Hezbollah's massive military infrastructure in southern Lebanon. In just 5 months of intense operations, they have neutralized over 1,000 terrorist sites, many of which were ingeniously and cynically hidden inside civilian homes, schools, and hospitals. Using advanced technology like thermal imaging drones and autonomous robots, the Israeli Defense Forces have uncovered massive, hidden stockpiles of rockets, explosives, and heavy weaponry hidden in dense forests and quiet residential areas. The commander of the battalion, Lieutenant Colonel R., revealed in a recent briefing that the sheer, staggering volume of weaponry found was far beyond their initial intelligence expectations. Hezbollah had essentially turned entire peaceful villages into fortified underground weapon depots by destroying these sophisticated tunnels and observation posts. The Israeli military is attempting to create a permanent buffer zone that would prevent future attacks, even if a temporary ceasefire is eventually reached. The battle for the border is not just about today's headlines. It is a fight for the long-term, multi-generational security of northern Israel, and the stakes for the families living there could not be higher. While the military battles rage on the ground, a quiet, historic, and deeply concerning shift is occurring in the global energy market that will affect the price of every plane ticket in the world. In April, Europe imported a record-breaking, unprecedented amount of aviation fuel from the United States. This is a direct, painful consequence of the war in Iran and the effective blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Since the conflict escalated on the 28th of last month, the traditional supply routes from the Middle East, which normally provide a staggering 75% of Europe's jet fuel, have been completely severed. The world is witnessing a radical reorganization of the global energy map in real time. The numbers associated with this shift are truly staggering and should give every traveler pause. Europe is now importing between 149,000 and 200,000 barrels of jet fuel per day from across the Atlantic. This is the highest level of imports since records began in 2015, and it is straining the limits of the global tanker fleet. For European airlines, which were already struggling to recover from the pandemic, this shift has been a financial and operational nightmare. Jet fuel prices have more than doubled since the start of the war, leading to urgent, desperate calls for the European Commission to intervene and ensure the very survival of the aviation industry. The European Aviation Association, which represents the continent's 5 largest and most influential airlines, is demanding a centralized monitoring mechanism and a joint procurement strategy for fuel similar to what was done with vaccines. They are even advocating for the immediate suspension of carbon emission trading systems and the total abolition of aviation taxes to offset these crushing, unsustainable costs. While the European Union requires member states to maintain a 90-day emergency reserve of oil, The specific stocks for jet fuel are reaching dangerously low levels. In key global hubs like London, Heathrow, and Amsterdam Schiphol, we are talking about the potential for grounded fleets and canceled vacations on a massive scale. If the global market cannot find a way to replace the missing Middle Eastern supplies within the next few weeks, analysts warn that fuel inventories could reach a critical red alert danger zone by June. We are looking at a potential 23-day supply window, which would trigger a genuine continent-wide fuel crisis. Although the United States is the world's largest consumer of jet fuel, it has heroically doubled its exports to 442,000 barrels per day to fill the gap and support its allies. This transatlantic energy bridge is currently the only thing keeping European skies open and the global economy moving. But it is a fragile bridge that could break under the weight of a prolonged conflict. Let's be crystal clear. We are living through a period where the old, predictable world order is crumbling in real time before our very eyes. The sheer audacity of the Iranian threats, the grinding desperation of the Russian economy, the looming dark shadow of conflict in Cuba, and the radical, chaotic reorganization of global energy markets all point to a single, inescapable conclusion. The era of predictable stability and cheap energy is over. Every decision made in the next few weeks, whether it is made in a deep bunker in Tehran, a secure room in the Kremlin, or the Oval Office in Washington, will determine the fate of millions and the future of the continent we share. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over and the stakes are only getting higher. The 90-day clock is ticking on European fuel reserves. The missiles in the Strait of Hormuz are on hair trigger standby, and the economic fury of the United States is only beginning to be felt by those who have challenged the international order. The world is watching with bated breath, and right now, the balance of power is being decided not by diplomatic platitudes or empty words, but by the cold, hard, and unforgiving reality of military and economic strength. This is how the map of the 21st century is being drawn in blood, in oil, and in the relentless pursuit of power. We are all witnesses to history in the making, and the world we all wake up to tomorrow may look nothing like the one we know today. The geopolitical tectonic plates are shifting, and we are all feeling the tremors. This is the new reality. Let that sink in.